What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Social Standard Podcast. My guest today is Corrina Owens. She is the Chief Brand Evangelist for Purple Cork, and we are going to get down into the weeds on what it means to be an evangelist, what this trend is, and what you need to know. So, Corrina, what's up and welcome.
Hey, Jess, thanks so much for having me on. I'm a huge fan of your podcast, so it's just such a treat for me to be able to join.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I'm glad to hear it. And as I alluded, I want to talk all about like what it means to be an evangelist. So before we do that, just tell me a little bit about like how did you become an evangelist for Purple Cork?
So it's a great story. I work for Purple Cork. We're a virtual experience solution. So we curate very specialized experiences for vineyards across the world that you need exclusive access to for B2B audiences. And I actually was Purple Cork's second customer. So 3 years ago when she launched during 2020, so the height of when everything was needing to go digital, I was her second customer, right behind Sixth Sense, if you're familiar with Sixth Sense. And I have just been a fan ever since. So I was probably one of her most, raving fans for what she offers. And so I have been taking her, of course, with me from company to company, putting her into all our programs, putting Purple Cork into all our programs. But then I've also just been, the dark social. I've been talking to my peers and advising them on who should they select for these types of experiences. And so I've been evangelizing her just organically for a while. Wow. And so she came at a point where she was really she was experiencing hyper growth. And she reached out to me and we talked about what a collaboration could look like. And it ended up turning into really a full-time position. So it's really just a great strategy that she deployed to think about, hey, how can I take my best fit customer and utilize them full-time?
Super smart. Wow. Okay. I want to get into that in a lot of detail shortly. But before we do that, since you are an evangelist, tell me, like, what does it mean to be an evangelist in 2023?
Yeah, I think for B2B especially, it's going to look quite a bit different than maybe what people would typically consider. My role, like I sit within the marketing C-suite, right? But I'm, of course, involved in sales efforts. I'm involved heavily in operations, pricing, positioning, and packaging. Like that all falls under me too, and my work with our co-founder. But it's just encompassing of how can we best get our message out to the market. And I'm really kind of a channel, essentially, is how I think that most founders could think about what is an evangelist going to be. So you could have an internal subject matter expert, so SMEs, like that could be how you see an evangelist. How you leverage third-party research firms, you could see that as an evangelist, especially if your category is fairly new and maybe those things like Gartner Quadrants don't exist for you and you want to be seen with more of that enterprise audience, that's how you could be thinking about an evangelist. But I think it looks different from company to company, but certainly all those different types of roles and responsibilities I described could fall under what an evangelist would do.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense to me because I had mentioned this earlier, but before we had got connected, I did a search on LinkedIn and just for the word evangelist. And there were like 24,000 people that have evangelists in their title somewhere. And I thought, how is that possible that so many people could have that? Right. Now, I think there are definitely going to be some that have a religious bend, which we can kind of, even if you omit those, let's say half of them are that. Still 12,000 people, that's still quite a lot. And this is just in the US. So, to me, that smells like a trend a little bit. And I also think that if you look a little bit deeper, I'm guessing that there are a lot of people who are evangelists that don't necessarily have that in their title. So I think probably one of the best examples I have right now is Salesforce. They had been in the press recently paying Matthew McConaughey like $10 million to be an ambassador for them. And really, he's kind of an evangelist in a lot of ways. Right?
You're spot on. I think even too, LinkedIn recently, they're not, I don't think they're calling him that, but God, what is the rapper? Snoop Dogg. Oh, Snoop Dogg. They actually brought on, they brought him on. I started seeing him all over LinkedIn. That's where I pretty much spent all my time creating content. Sure. And I was like, oh, smart. Okay. They're taking a celebrity. I mean, the play in, I'll be curious to see how that plays out because I don't know how targeted that approach is, right? Like how targeted is that audience other than just being like a Matthew McConaughey figurehead, right? But yeah, I think that's the goal. I think that also like influencers, right? That's certainly a different way to look at it too. But I think the ideal should be that you're really, so I talked about before how like she brought on her best fit customer, me. That's how I think you should really look at it, especially when you're thinking about startups and more niche industries. Like you really want to highlight who is your core customer, who are your subject matter experts, and it's not going to be these celebrities. Maybe that's going to draw an initial attention, but it's certainly not going to help you scale quickly.
Yeah, but I think that probably applies not just to small companies, but to big companies as well, right? Looking at your, what they call ICP, right? Your ideal customer profile. Who is that and who embodies it? And I think what's so interesting is this is exactly what we do in B2C influencer marketing, right? You come out, who is your target audience? Who looks like them? Who acts like them? Who is in that conversation naturally? Where are they? And like, how do you then take your product and insert it? It's really no different, right? I think the main difference, if I'm understanding it properly, is that evangelists are paid by the company as like a salaried position or some sort of like consulting, like long-term fee, almost like an ambassador.
100%. Yeah. And I certainly know that a lot of titles for like B2B influencer marketing, you will see on LinkedIn profiles that they have something like brand ambassador or brand evangelist. And that's not typically a full-time role. It typically is like a consulting engagement of some kind. But the chief evangelist is from what I'm seeing in the market, that certainly does indicate that that's a full-time C-suite position.
Yeah. And I've seen that too. I know Canva has a chief evangelist. That was probably one of the larger brands that I had seen that had them. And I know Adobe, who's a client of ours, they also have several evangelists or people with evangelist in their title. And I do think it's smart because you need people, you're not going to have, like, does Canva have a huge sales force, a huge sales team? I don't know. Maybe they do, right? But to have someone who's out and who's public facing, can draw a crowd, has real influence, and is not the CEO.
Right, exactly. I think too, my former company was Gong, if you're familiar with them.
Yes.
And our former CMO, so our first CMO, he transitioned from being a CMO to actually the chief evangelist, and we brought on a new CMO to be more operational. So I think that it depends too, the stage you're at with your company, right? They do have a pretty decent sales force, but they didn't want to completely lose that brand integrity because he helped build the brand. He knows the audience inside and out. He's built all those relationships. But he didn't want to necessarily follow the trajectory of what a CMO path would look like. So they just transitioned him to being an evangelist. And that's because he does embody what an ICP would, talk about. That's his audience, that's his network, and that's his way to keep being with the company.
That's so interesting. So it's a little bit CMO, little bit salesperson, little bit business development, really.
Yeah, I would say that it's pretty important that you do have some sales acumen to be in this role, because I'm constantly interfacing with clients and prospects and forecasting our pipeline. And I'm lucky that I made sure that was something that I developed in my career, that I was in all forecasting calls and pipelining meetings, et cetera. So I feel really confident. I've even been a quota carrier before. So I feel very confident to do that. And I think it's a necessary skill. I do think that you need to not only know how to communicate a message, but how to deliver that message and pivot based on what the client is asking of you.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. Anyone who's at the C level should be able to do that, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Fair. Yeah.
I think, but to me that's so interesting because if you think about like I guess the way that I naturally sort of go with that is like, okay, sure, an evangelist, a chief evangelist. Let's work on the fact that this is someone who is they're showing up, they are an employee every single day at the company, and they are an external evangelist, because I know that there are internal and external ones as well. But they're an external evangelist. Like, what does that job look like? Like, how do you write a job description for that? What should you expect of someone who is going to be your chief evangelist officer?
Yeah, I think it's very important to designate between the two, right? Because for a long time, in a informal way, I was acting like an evangelist for this brand, and I serve as a formal evangelist for other brands too. And there is a difference. I think that when I'm working externally and I'm not, on payroll, I'm not necessarily always embedded into what does the pipeline look like? What does the forecast look like? What is our process? What are our new product development releases? I'm kind of on the back end of that. I think when you bring somebody in internally, they really need to have a ton of business acumen to know, like, okay, how are we going to help grow this business? How are we going to take it from X to Z? What are the crucial operational elements too that we need to be considering? What are the channels that we need to be focusing on and double downing on? How are we going to need, I talked about positioning earlier, like how are we going to position ourselves to grow to that? So that's like marketing and product marketing specifically. So it's very much, I hate the saying, but it's really very much like a jack of all trades or a unicorn, right? Like you have to have a lot of entrepreneurial skill sets to be able to step into this role, because it's going to evolve beyond just being kind of like a spokesperson, which is what I would say external brand ambassadors are typically tasked with doing, is to just push out a message. But there's so much more that goes when you're actually in the company, right? You're pushing out a message, but you're actually refining it, and you're actually implementing strategies to help grow and scale the business.
Wow. I mean, that almost sounds like a CEO, right?
Well, I do say that I'm very lucky that I feel like I'm riding shotgun here with our CEO, right? Like I'm like her right hand. We're constantly in meetings talking about how we're going to grow the business. You know, what is it going to look like, not just now, but what is it going to look like in 5 years, maybe 10 years?
Sure.
And it involves like, you know, all aspects of marketing. And I do think that when I've stepped into, because I've been working predominantly in SaaS my whole career, I do think that when I've stepped into organizations, especially when I've had such a direct line to the CEO, that's what I found to be lacking as a skill set is, okay, how are we going to market ourselves? How are we going to position ourselves? And then how are we going to do that from stage to stage? Because many of these early startups don't hire a chief marketing officer to their staff for, you know, quite some time. Like I won't see for many A, B companies, Series A, Series B, I don't see them have a chief marketing officer. They might have like a director or even just a marketing manager, but that level of seniority is typically not seen. So that skill set that you have after working, you know, decades in an industry, specifically in marketing, really is complementary to be like right side by side as a CEO.
That's interesting. And that makes sense, I think, for smaller businesses, right? So is that the differentiation then? If you are an evangelist of some sort for a small to medium-sized business, you are up there partnering on go-to-market, on product, kind of that jack of all trades role. But as you then look at larger companies like a Salesforce, like a Canva, like an Adobe, you know, those guys, you're not going to get that direct level with the CEO or even the CMO potentially. So they are likely leveraging evangelists more as external facing spokesmen and women.
Spokespeople.
Yeah,
I would say, I mean, I think that the best examples you describe would probably be Adobe and Salesforce. I think there's probably a lot more division with the C-suite there. But I would think Canva, like I would think that chief evangelist is side by side with the CMO, if not the CEO as well, because it's so much about, you know, managing that subject matter expert to be the brand essentially, right? Like they're becoming the brand. And that's what makes influencer marketing today just so important, because, you know, we can't be everywhere at once. We can't optimize every channel to the fullest. So, you know, especially in the age too of AI, you know, content's going to really start to become really commoditized. And what's going to really matter is the relationships that you have and the relationships that people within your company have with your key, you know, stakeholders that you want to sell business to.
Yes.
So I think that it's a very new role, and there's a lot that I think can be done to maybe formalize it a bit more, to make it more accessible. But I do think that marketers who are looking to level up their career are really, really well suited to step into a role like this, maybe then the trajectory path to CMO.
Yes, I love that. I think that's so smart. And I love that you brought up the AI component, because I do think that I mean, that's huge. We see that on our end as well, right? We have a whole sort of LinkedIn strategy. We do a lot of things. We do the podcast, hello. And, you know, all of these sort of like pull, like we want to pull people in instead of pushing our message out necessarily. And that's a requirement of every single business now. And I think that we're seeing that from the startups in the SaaS and the MarTech space, especially, are leading the way. Right. And then I think that we're going to continue to see these guys build bridges so that larger companies can go in and figure that out. Wow. Super interesting stuff though. I mean, I can't get over the parallels that you draw from, you know, so many traditional marketing like ways, like influencer marketing, ambassadors, or even look at like, you know, I just saw an ad that Serena Williams had done for Lincoln, right? That's also the same. Like she embodies what they were going after. And they kind of show her and her lifestyle there. So obviously the evangelists aren't necessarily in the ads per se, but it just feels so similar. So, you know, that, and you couple, I think, also with the fact that every business is now needs a face and a personal, some sort of personalization. And so I just almost wonder if the chief evangelist officer, or, you know, whatever the title ultimately is, this evangelist role isn't just humanizing the brand in another way.
Yeah, I think it's a modern look on what should marketing look like? How should it be utilized? I think that for, so many SaaS companies and tech companies, you're in spreadsheets, right? You're crunching out like conversions for, X dollar to this conversion, and you're losing that relationship aspect. I mean, there's so many organizations that I walk into, and there's nobody on the marketing team, no matter the size, that has maybe ever spoken directly with a customer. And it just blows my mind. And it's just because that's not what traditionally marketers are set up to do these days. They're just set up to kind of be hands on keyboards, pushing out ads and pushing out emails. But that actual interaction and relationship with your audience typically it's just happening with sales, but it shouldn't be, right? Like that should serve a particular purpose.
Sure.
So I do think that probably